Hey team, happy Thursday. We are officially back on track because it's 2019 and there's a lot of good stuff to cover. I love this lesson. I'm excited about this lesson. I hope you are too. There's a ton of stuff to it, so let's get to it. Number one, do not miss the potty joke and don't miss the sarcasm. When Elijah is talking to the prophets of Baal, he makes the comment, maybe your God is relieving himself. That's a potty joke, and he's being sarcastic about it. Two things that students, boys and girls alike, typically like. Bring that up to them. Bring that up early on to them even. Just get them laughing. But seriously, like he's making fun of their God about having to go poop. That's pretty awesome. So anyway, let's jump more into this. Number two, guys, slow down. I know this is an incredibly familiar story. It's going to be familiar to them. Not nearly as familiar as what they think they know it. And that's frequently where we're at with our kids. Like, oh yeah, I already know the story, and they check out. Slow down, but remind them it's not about knowing the story and knowing the details. It's about seeing Christ in the story and then seeing what it is that we need to learn from the story too. They can know all the history and the details and the ins and outs and even the funny stuff, but if it doesn't change their lives, it doesn't matter. And this story can and will change our lives. So slow down as you're studying it, slow down as you're presenting it too, even though you think it's a really familiar story, and it is. I've slowed down. Let me encourage you to do the same thing. The Ronda Rousey, Holly Holmes story is dated. That's from 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't know how many of our kids are really into UFC, so that's not going to really appeal to them. That being said, something interesting about that particular fight, that was the beginning and the end of Ronda Rousey's career. What you need to know about Baal worship was this particular altercation was the beginning of the end of Baal worship. Baal took on other forms. In fact, he ended up kind of morphing into the god Zeus. We'll get into that in a minute, but this was the death blow to Baal worship in Israel, which is a really, really cool thing. Just like Holly Holmes being Ronda Rousey was the death blow for her career. The question for option number 2, and I want to read it to you. That first question, the Israelites' inability to decide between Baal and God plainly revealed their idolatry. This is the part that I underlined. When we find it hard to worship God alone, what do we learn about the hidden idols in our own lives? That's an incredibly powerful question, but I actually cut it off a little bit earlier. When we find it hard to worship God, what do we learn about the hidden idols in our lives? Because the truth is, it's not just that we struggle to worship God alone. It's just we struggle to worship, period. So mull that question over in your own hearts, but bring that up to the students because that could lead to some really cool conversations. Let's see. Here's what you need to know about Baal. Baal was considered to be, actually Baal means Lord for starters, which that's what Yahweh means as well. Okay. And so he was a god that mimics Yahweh, at least in all the big ways. He was known as the God of all gods. He was the God of life. He was the God of thunder. He was the God of the sun. Elijah, by the way, knew all this. That's why he issued this challenge. What they heard was, hey, let's have this duel, and whatever God can throw down fire from heaven, that God wins. And all of the prophets of Baal thought, well, that's what our God does. He's the God of the sun. He's the God of thunder. This is easy. Elijah tricked them into this thing. And this is something God laid up on his heart, but it's really, really interesting. But here's what's important, is Baal mimicked all of the qualities of Yahweh God, his power and his attributes and his control over all things. What Baal did not require was holiness. He was a God that let you do pretty much whatever you wanted. He required some sacrifices from you. And the way that he was worshipped was actually more fun than the way that Yahweh God was worshipped. And he really didn't have a standard on sin at all. And this is what we as humans do. We make God in our own image. It's kind of cool to think that there's a God out there that controls everything, but I don't like these sort of standards, so I'm just going to tweak this and ignore that. And that's idol worship. It's not just when we worship something besides God. It's when we tweak God into the way that we want God to be. That's idol worship, and that's a really dangerous place that a lot of believers end up in today. So point that out to them. That's a big, big deal. Ahab called Elijah a troubler. Right out the gate, you see this right there at the start of chapter 18. When Elijah walks in, Ahab says, "Is that you troubler?" And Elijah immediately turns him back. I'm not the one causing trouble in Israel. You are. Here's what I think is good to point out. In our society, Christians are frequently described as the ones who are causing all the trouble. You know, if you Christians would just calm down, if you'd stop being so holier than thou, we could all just get along. But y'all constantly bring up, you know, this is wrong and this is wrong, and it's the table's getting turned on us. That's an old trick of Satan's. That's nothing new. And we need to have the same courage and boldness that Elijah had. I don't know that we'll ever get the opportunity to call down fire from heaven, but the same God that is helping Elijah in his situation is the God that's helping us as we face people that are making the same accusation against us that was being made against Elijah. The limping, the idea of limping between different thoughts, I really mull over that image in your head. Think about what it means to limp and what that feels like and how hard it is to get around. This is the way that Elijah describes a really just poor spiritual life. So you're limping through life because you can't decide if you're really going to follow God or not. There's a lot of good imagery there. Bring that up to the students. I'm almost done, guys. There's so much here. Baal is a God that requires blood. Jesus is the God that gave his blood for us. You got to help the students see that. That's a big, big deal. Also, and this is a small thing, but we do have students that are cutters, and the fact that the Baal worshipers are cutting themselves, some of them might catch that. They need to know, I say that. We probably don't say this, but it is always intriguing to understand that cutting really is a demonic thing. Cutting is always used in satanic worship. But that's really 9 times out of 10. That's where those thoughts come from. It's the enemy that's wanting us to hurt ourselves. So anyway, Baal's a God that requires blood. Jesus gave us his blood. Unholy leaders almost always lead to unholy people. So we need to be very mindful of who it is that we're paying attention to, who we're spending time with, whose directions that we're following. And even if we think, well, you know, I'm just going to ignore the parts of that person that I don't like, their influence on our lives wears off on us. And that's what was going on with Ahab, and even more so with Jezebel, Ahab's wife. This is why Israel was in such bad shape. They had a tremendous amount of really bad leaders, one after another. And then the last thing, oblation. It says that Elijah gave the sacrifice at the time of oblation. That's just a fancy way of saying the evening sacrifice. It was a very solemn sacrifice, but that's what that means. Somebody's going to ask that. So, guys, I know I went over my time. I love y'all. I'm so excited to hang out with you on Sunday. Welcome Robin to our team. We'll talk to you later. Bye.